Welcome, everyone. I am going to talk about imagining scenes or imagining things in your memoir that you don't know. This falls into the category of speculation or conjuring things that maybe you weren't alive to witness. And this is a particularly challenging way to write for a lot of people, especially because when you hear in memoir that everything has to be true, it's your perspective, it's the things that you know. And yet increasingly we're finding in our memoir classes and in memoirs that we're reading that people are reaching into the past. They're telling stories of their families, and they're even stepping sometimes into the points of view of family members. Now, I want to have a caveat here, which is to say, if and when you step into someone else's point of view, it's quite important that you have some kind of device so that it's quite clear to your reader what you're doing and that you're not just all of a sudden head jumping into someone else's head, which is the stuff of fiction. However, in your memoirs, if you jump into the head of a family member, and largely you will see this done with parents and or grandparents, not usually random strangers. It's usually the people who you know intimately, family stories that you hold close. And so if this is something that you're interested in doing, I have two books tonight that I want to share and share a couple of examples from. The first is from our very own Linda Joy Myers, who is here with us tonight and has given me permission to read a little bit. Linda Joy, I mean, I think you have done a tremendous job in many places in this book of imagining, and for anybody who's interested, definitely read the whole thing to pick up on all the various ways that she does this. But Linda Joy does write in her grandmother's point of view at various points, and also in this sort of broad, sweeping family story kind of way. And so I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs from the chapter that's called The Way It Was. And it says, as I learned about the stories and genealogy of our family, a story about the generations came to me, an epic tale of American migration, of settlements in the West, characters in long dresses and bonnets, a swirl of dust, huge harvest meals, women slaving over cook stoves. I could see a grand sweep of time and history embedded in the land and the people who came to settle. Blanche, who's her grandmother, was born in 1873, 3 years before Custer's last stand. Her mother and grandmother arrived in Iowa when the Indians, the Sac and the Fox, still lived on the banks of the Mississippi River. I see myself as a pearl on the long necklace of this family, connected to branches of other families woven and broken by life, and I had to know more about them. The story has the tone of a fairy tale. It begins with the wind and the land and can't be separated from the migrations of people from Europe. We are all wanderers, meandering, lost, and searching for home. And this entire section is about family. I mean, there is a guide to her generations, and it is really exiting her own personal I story and entering into the story of her family. And I want to encourage this, I guess, for some of you. It's not going to be pertinent for everybody, but one of the things that's nice about exiting the I for a little while is that it just gives your reader a different vibe. In the sense that memoir is very I focused, and it ought to be. You are the protagonist of the tale, you're the narrator. But when you do this kind of writing, when you're weaving a story and you're telling the story of others, and especially if it's a generational story or if you're writing about times before you were born, it can just add texture and depth to a story that is otherwise very uniquely contained. So there's lots of that. Again, Song of the Plains, gorgeous book. The second book that I'm sharing is Eva and Eve, written by Julie Metz. And Julie happens to be my creative director at She Writes Press. And this is also a beautiful book. And the thing that I love in Julie's book that she does, I mean, she also enters into her grandparents' point of view, but she uses this particular device. She uses the photograph. And so she'll say things like, in a photograph, and then she uses it as an entry point to then enter into the points of view of her grandparents, particularly. And her grandparents escaped Austria during well, before World War II. And so let's see, this just as by way of example, and this is on page 108, in case anybody gets the book and wants to find it. It says, in a photograph that does not exist, taken after the wedding ceremony on Schaffhauser Strasse, that's a street in Austria, Julius and Anna are in a private compartment aboard the night train to Trieste. From there, they will travel onward to an Italian resort just south of Venice. In the morning, they might, notice these words, notice the sort of qualifying words. They might catch a glimpse of the mountains he loves to climb. Julius tells her there are coffee houses just like those in Vienna, where the Triestini will speak some German. It was a hot day in Vienna, and the evening is still warm. Julius pushes open the window in their compartment to let in the evening air. He takes off his jacket and places it in the luggage rack and unbuttons his shirt. She wishes she could unbutton her dress with the same casual air. He sits down beside her and looks with a playful reverence she cannot quite read. Then he reaches for her, crushing the material of her pale blue dress, bought for this trip at a shop on Kartner Strauss, a nipped waist belted with one of the few crinoline skirts. So it just clearly what I'm trying to show you is that she enters fully into a point of view. You know, there is that qualifying word might, and that is used a lot. There's a lot of sort of speculative words. But again, a couple pages later, here's an interesting contrast because you noted that that one said in a photograph that does not exist. You know, so it's kind of an interesting entry point into someone else's point of view. Here she says, in photographs that do exist, the years unfold before painted backdrops on the Schaller Portrait Studio on Kartner Strauss. First, it is just Fritz, a handsome boy, dark like his father. He can get wild. And she goes on to describe the children of her grandparents, one of whom, of course, is her mother. So I love that device, and you can use something like that. But she uses it throughout, and there are different ways that you can imagine entering into descriptions like these. And if nothing else, I recommend reading these two books to show you some different ways to play. You know, and notably, these are like fictional devices that are being implemented into Memoir, which of course are yours for the taking. And it's just a matter of figuring out how to harness them and make them work for you.